We've got 22 designated stops. You can find those on your map. Our trolleys run about 15 to 20 minutes apart at those stops. So if you thought you missed us, you didn't. There's going to be another one coming up right behind it. Now, if you are planning for the full day, just keep in mind our last trolley goes out of here at 4:30 this afternoon. Makes one final loop around the city. So plan ahead if you need to get back somewhere specific. So how many, is it your first time with us here in St. Augustine? All right, awesome. Wow, quite a few. Awesome. Well, welcome to St. Augustine. We are the oldest continuously inhabited European settlement in the United States. And yes, you have to say all of those words for it to count. So we start with an explorer turned politician. His name was Ponce de Leon. He was actually the first governor of Puerto Rico. And he had heard some tales from the townsfolk that said that there was a land out there that had treasure and gold and even had a fountain that could restore your youthfulness. So he was given permission to go search for this land. Originally he was headed for the island of Bimini in the Bahamas, but got a little blown off course and stumbled on this land instead. It was Easter Sunday, 1513. Flowers were in bloom. It was a time of year known as the Festival of Flowers, Pascua de las Flores. So he named it La Florida, and he claimed it for Spain. Now, over the next several years, they would send the Spanish over to try and settle this land, but they were having a little bit of trouble due to the weather and the swamp-like conditions. And then in 1564, word got over to Spain that the French had started a successful colony called Fort Caroline, which is our present-day Jacksonville. Of course, Spain wasn't too happy about that. They claimed this land for themselves. No way were the French going to be the first to have a settlement. So they put together their best captain general. His name was Pedro Menendez. Sent him over here with 3 tasks. 1, take out the French. 2, start that successful colony. And 3, convert anybody still here to Catholicism. So they made their way over. The first day that they sighted land, it was known as the Feast Day of St. Augustine. That was where the name St. Augustine came from. But they had determined an attack by foot would be best. So they docked their ships, trenched through a storm to get up to the fort, only to find there was hardly anybody there. Well, that's because the French found out the Spanish landed. They went to go take out the Spanish, only they got swept up in that same storm. Some of them were swept all the way down to Port Canaveral. About 250 were shipwrecked on our Anastasia Island. So the only ones that could be saved at the fort were those that would convert to Catholicism, and there weren't that many. So it was really easy for Pedro Menendez to take out the French there at the fort. Now they made their way back down to where they had docked their ships. And if you take a look to your left, just after this building here, you're going to see what we call the Great Cross. It stands 208 feet high. That is where they had landed. They subsequently then met with the natives, had the very first Mass and the first Thanksgiving, and started this colony of St. Augustine in 1565. Now I know you're thinking, you're like, wait a second, we thought the first Thanksgiving was with the Pilgrims. Yeah, that didn't happen until 55 years later. Now, Pedro Menendez, he did eventually catch up to those 250 that were shipwrecked over on Anastasia Island. None of them would convert to Catholicism. So they all met the hand of the sword. Their bodies were dumped into the river, and the river was then named the Matanzas River as it stands today. The word Matanzas, that translates to massacre. So Pedro Menendez did everything he was sent here to do. Took out the French, started that successful colony, and converted anybody still here to Catholicism. Now the spot he chose for St. Augustine proved to be a prime spot. We've got a little inlet to a bay and a river, and then our proximity to the sea. But we were also subjected to many early attacks and raids. Now some of those early raids, those were by the pirates. A couple significant pirate raids, one in 1586 by Sir Francis Drake, one in 1668 by Robert Searles. But it was a military attack in 1702 that really came through and devastated the town. It was led by Governor James Moore of South Carolina. It was an attack by the British known as the Queen Anne's War. And right after that attack, the townsfolk got together and said, you know, we need to do something to better protect ourselves against these attacks and these raids. So they put a wall up all the way around the city. St. Augustine became the very first walled city, or presidio, made out of palmetto logs. It had a 15-foot deep moat in front of it. And inside that moat were plants called Spanish bayonet plants. So if you think of a bayonet being real sharp and pointy, that's what these plants were. Here to your left is a portion of that wall. Now you might think it looks really short. Well, that ground has shifted over the centuries. That 15-foot deep moat's now just a tiny little ditch. This here was the east and west wall. Would have ran right straight across this way, right down the present-day Orange Street that we're turning onto right now. And they didn't call them walls back then. They actually called them lines. This one here was the Cuba defensive line. Here to your right is another portion of the wall, coming up a little bit closer. And then just after that, at the corner on your right, are those Spanish bayonet plants. They're the real tall, sharp, spiky leafed plant. Now this corner here, this is present-day Cordova Street. This was the north and south wall, called the Rosario line. So right here would have been one corner inside of the walled city. Now all the way around the outskirts of the wall, they had what were called redoubts. So coming up next to your right is the Santo Domingo redoubt. They had 9 of these redoubts, and the redoubts had places for cannons and men with artillery. So between the armed redoubts, the wall, the moat, and the plants, the town was finally better protected against those attacks and those raids. Then we're going to time travel, bounce around through the decades and the centuries. Here to our left, this building is the Orange Street School. That was built in 1910. Students there were K through 12. They would have lived within about a mile's distance. They would have walked or ridden their bikes, or actually even ridden a trolley to school. We had electric trolleys in town at that time. Back in 1910, prices, teachers there made about $1 a day. Still in use today for the schools. It's the admin building for the county. This building to our right, this is the St. Augustine Historic Parking Facility. Woohoo! Alright, so they're only exciting if you get a good parking spot. And not necessarily historic, but the land it sits on. This was home to St. Augustine's very first grand hotel. The San Marco Hotel stood 5 stories tall, had 8 towers that stood 8 stories tall. Built in 1885. In fact, those towers could be seen from to 16 miles out to sea. Now, because it was a grand hotel, it had some fancy features, including Otis elevators and a bowling alley. But also notable, one of its guests. His name was Henry Flagler, and we're going to hear a lot more about him later on in the tour, but he was a wealthy businessman down from New York City one winter, celebrating his honeymoon with his second wife. Was so impressed by the features here at the San Marco Hotel, he said, you know, I think I could do some business here. About 12 years later, the San Marco Hotel burned down, albeit somewhat mysteriously. But here to our left, our Renaissance Hotel is a miniature version of what the San Marco Hotel looked like. Now the San Marco Hotel, complete with the building and its property, took up about 26 acres right here in this area. Our next stop is stop number 2. This is the Visitor Information Center. If you're exiting at stop number 2, please remain seated until I've come to a complete stop and you hear the bell. Once you hear the bell, then you can safely exit to your left, towards the sidewalk only, turning around and going down backwards, just like you're climbing down a ladder, opposite way that you climbed up, holding on to the handles and the uprights. So our visitor center back here to our left. It's got one of our ticket booths inside. Also a small free museum. You can just go in, take a look around. They've got a lot of artifacts, a little timeline of the history. Got a little gift shop inside of there as well. Also clean restrooms and bottle refill stations too. Alright, we are all clear. No more on, no more off. Trolley's in motion. Reminder to please stay seated, keeping yourself and your belongings inside the trolley at all times. As we exit out, we're going to take a look across the street to our left. You'll see 3 tall palm trees, kind of on the other side of that truck there. Those are the sable palm. That is the state tree of Florida. And in the early 1700s, the Scottish and the Irish came here. They would cut those palm trees down, take the heart of it out, and they would cook it. Called it swamp cabbage. Alright, who's ready for lunch? Now, the Scottish and the Irish, they were also our first cowboys, in charge of herding the cattle, and they would use a bullwhip. and they would crack it high into the sky. And the sound of the crack of that bullwhip, you could hear that for a mile away. So the Spanish that were here started to call them Los Craqueros, or crackers. That's where the term Florida crackers began. Now in 1821, Florida became a U.S. territory. Not quite a state just yet, but a U.S. territory. And along with it came the yellow fever. Yellow fever came through town super fast. Took about a third of the population. Well, at the time, there was only one cemetery in town. It was Catholic only. And the other members of the population, they were Protestant. So they were given permission to start their own cemetery, but it had to be outside the city limits. So here to our right, this is the old burying ground, later renamed Huguenot Cemetery, just outside the city wall. And you'll notice there's not very many headstones. And that's because during the yellow fever, they had to do mass graves of up to 25 bodies at a time. If by chance you were the last body on top of the pile, and they knew who you were, then you might have gotten your name on a headstone. Otherwise, all of those mass graves are still unmarked today. Our next stop, stop number 3, Potter's Wax Museum, which is inside of the 1886 drugstore of T.W. Speisiger. So Speisiger, he actually moved here to grow oranges to make orange juice, but found out it was going to take about 5 to 10 years to be profitable. So he went back to his original trade of apothecary. Well, I come from 3 generations of pharmacists, and I know back then they just whipped up concoctions of whatever they had laying around and called it medicine. So T.W. Speisiger's concoction was a mixture of spring water, grain alcohol, and opium. Yep, it's party now, folks. Our Potter's Wax Museum, we were the first in the United States, second largest in the world. You'll find yourself walking amongst it up close and personal to over 160 historical figures and celebrities, and I mean up close and personal. There's no ropes or barriers or anything. You're literally walking right amongst them. Now straight ahead here, this is the Talamato Cemetery. That's the Catholic cemetery that I mentioned. Originally home to the Guale Indians. This was an Indian mission ground. And if you're into that kind of thing, this is also one of our most haunted locations. If you're exiting at stop 3, please remain seated until I come to a complete stop and you hear the bell. Then you can safely exit down either side, turning around and going down backwards. Just like you're climbing down a ladder, holding onto the handles and uprights. So our Potter's Wax Museum, we pride ourselves on the historical figures that we have here. We've got everything's in groups, kings and queens, goes back to King Henry VIII. We've got all the presidents, authors, artists, military, horror, astronauts. Some of our celebrities include Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Ray Charles, Elvis Presley. Our newest is Taylor Swift. Hey, pretty much. It's a light-up stage, though. It's like a light-up dance floor. She's playing her guitar. Take your photo with her. You can tell all your friends you met Taylor, and no one will know the difference. You could say you met Elvis, too, but they might... Unless they remember back in, what was it, the 80s when they saw him at Burger King? All right. We are all clear. No more on, no more off. This Charlie's in Motion. If you're just joining us, welcome aboard. My name is Deb. Please remain seated, keeping yourself and your belongings inside the trolley at all times. There's no smoking, vaping, or consumption of alcohol. This is a narrated history tour, so we do please ask you keep all personal and cell phone conversations to a minimum. So while St. Augustine was a walled city, they still had to have a way to get in and out of town. So down at the end of the street on our left, we're going to come across the city gates. Originally built when the wall was built, they were made out of wood, and they did have a gate. They would lock it at night. So if you were running a little late getting home, you might have got locked out of town. You would have to sleep out here under the stars with all the critters out there. Then in 1808, they reconstructed the city gates as they look today with a material called coquina. That was mined from the ocean floor, basically a mixture of sand and shells, but it turns into a limestone type material. And then about 100 years later, the town was just going to tear them down. But the Daughters of the American Revolution found out, and they said, we don't think so. And they set themselves up in front of these city gates. And here they still stand preserved for us today, coming up here on your left. Now our next stop is stop 4. That's our first of 3 stops on our St. George Street, our pedestrian mall. On this end of St. George Street, about a block to the right, is the oldest wooden schoolhouse. Dates back to the early 1700s. Now, as we hit this bend here, if you take a look to your right, you might see there is an anchor on the ground, and it's hooked to a chain that's wrapped around the building. That's the oldest wooden schoolhouse. In the early 30s, there was a storm coming in. They wanted to make sure it didn't go anywhere. Well, it worked. Still here, still chained up. If you're exiting here at stop 4, please remain seated until I come to a complete stop. And you hear the bell. Once you hear the bell, safely exit to your right towards the sidewalk only. Turning around to go down backwards, just like you're climbing down a ladder. Holding on to the handles and the uprights. Alright, thank you folks. Watch your step. Alright, we are all clear. No more on, no more off. Charlie's in motion. If you just joined us, welcome aboard. My name is Doug. Please remain seated, keeping yourself and your belongings inside the trolley at all times. There's no smoking, vaping, or consumption of alcohol. It is a narrated history tour, so would you please ask to keep all personal and cell phone conversations to a minimum. So here across the street to our left is our fort, the Castillo de San Marcos, made out of that same coquina. Took 23 years to build. This was built as a response to the 1668 pirate attack by Robert Searles, built between 1673 and 1695. But we're going to learn a little more about that later. That's our stop 17. We're talking about pirates. Our next stop, stop 5, is the Pirate Museum in Colonial Quarter. Pirate Museum here to our right, they have over 800 artifacts, including one of only 3 remaining Jolly Rogers flags, and a real pirate treasure chest. And then our Colonial Quarter right next door takes you back to the colonial times of St. Augustine. You can climb this watchtower and you can witness the firing of a cannon. If you're exiting here at stop 5, please remain seated till I come to a complete stop and you hear the bell. Once you hear the bell, then you can safely exit down either side, turning around to go down backwards, just like you're climbing down a ladder. Hold on to the handles and the uprights. So if you'd like a really good full view of the fort, this is it to your left here. You get a real good full view there of the fort. So the fort changed hands quite a few times over its tenure. It started out under Spanish rule, and then the British came in and took it over.
Sorry.
Then the Spanish got it back. Then we became U.S. territory. They changed the whole name to Fort Marion.
Oh.
And then a little bit later down the timeline went back to its original name of the Castillo de San Marcos. Alright, all clear. No more on, no more off. Charlie's in motion. A reminder to please stay seated, keeping yourself and your belongings inside the trolley at all times. Our stop number 6, our Bayfront stop, coming up right around the bend. But as we head that way, if you take a look to your left and you look all the way straight out there, that's the Atlantic Ocean out there. We got a really nice, clear day to see a little bit of surf out there. That inlet used to be a lot smaller. The Army of Engineers came in for us and widened it up. To the left is Milano Beach, and to the right is Anastasia Island. We got a gorgeous day here for you guys.
Night.
Alright, here we go. Stop number 6, our Bayfront stop. If you're exiting at stop number 6, please remain seated until I come to a complete stop and hear the bell. Once you hear the bell, then you can safely exit to your right towards the sidewalk only. Turning around to go down backwards like you're climbing down a ladder, holding on to the handles and uprights.
You okay?
So here to our left, that is the Matanzas River that I mentioned earlier, and on the other side, Anastasia Island. So on Anastasia Island, a little farther south, you're going to find Fort Matanzas. It was a secondary, smaller fort that they had built, and it was near that area where Pedro Menendez caught up to those 250 shipwrecked French, in which the massacre took place in 1565. They named this the Matanzas River, which again translates to massacre.
So he relocated for you.
Alright, all clear, no more on, no more off. Trolley's in motion. Reminder to please stay seated, keeping yourself and your belongings inside the trolley at all times. Now we're turning onto Hippolyta Street. You're going to notice it looks a little bit different than the other streets. It's pretty narrow, and it's also crooked. And that's all on purpose. So the Spanish designed these streets, and they had two reasons for the narrow streets. So any breeze coming in off the bay, the narrow streets that face this direction, it brings that breeze in and kind of filters it in through town. But also, when we had those attacks and those raids, it made it so the opposing forces couldn't spread out very far. They had to have a real small formation. And then with the crooked streets, they couldn't see very far up ahead. So all of that gave us the advantage. Now, Hippolyta is also a really good mixture of the early architecture, Spanish and British designs. So the Spanish came in, built one-story houses. They had flat roofs made of grass. The door was on the side of the house. You would have entered in through the courtyard of the garden. And then for their windows, they simply just had wooden slats. And you'll see some of those wooden slats at this next building on your left-hand side. The British came in, added second stories. Some would have balconies that hung out over the street. You'll see that ahead to your left as well. They moved the door to the street side and then added chimneys and added glass window panes. Next up is stop 7. That's our middle stop of St. George Street. If you're exiting here at stop 7, please remain seated till I come to a complete stop and you hear the bell. Once you hear the bell, safely exit down either side. Turning around to go down backwards like you're climbing down a ladder, holding on to the handles and the uprights. So our St. George Street here, a pedestrian mall, a little bit of everything on this street. You've got a lot of little shops and boutiques. We've got quite a few of our historical buildings, a lot of great places to grab a bite to eat or grab a drink. A few of our places do everyday, all-day live music featuring our local musicians. We've got Pierre's Pub and Milltop Tavern. And then just about everywhere you look, ice cream, fudge, and popsicles. And I'm not mad about that. There's nothing wrong with that, that's for sure. Alright, here we go. All clear. No more on, no more off. This trolley is in motion. And a reminder to please stay seated, keeping yourself and your belongings inside the trolley at all times. Also a reminder, this is a narrated history tour. We do please ask you to keep all personal and cell phone conversations to a minimum. So this area of town here, this is known as the Minorcan Quarter. So the Minorcans, they were a group of indentured servants that were brought over from the island of Minorca by Andrew Turnbull to work his indigo plantation in what is in current-day New Smyrna. Now, Mr. Turnbull, his conditions, they were absolutely horrendous. So a few of those servants managed to escape, caught the attention of Father Pedro Camps. They made their way here to St. Augustine. Father Camps, he went and had a talk with the governor, and then they were able to go back and bring several hundred of those servants back here to St. Augustine. Now, the British were here, and they very much welcomed their trades and their skills. But once the American Revolution was over, the British left town. And that left the Minorcans here by themselves. And they were like, we kind of like it here, we'd like to stay. And it's because they stayed that we can call ourselves the oldest continuously inhabited European settlement in the United States. And yes, you still have to say all of those words for it to count. So Henry Flagler, briefly mentioned him earlier. So he was partners with J.D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil. So a very successful, very, very wealthy businessman. And when he stayed here at the San Marco Hotel, he was so impressed by what it had to offer, he said, you know, I think I'm going to do some business here. But the land that he wanted to build on was already occupied. Little wooden church, Olivet Methodist Church. So Henry Flagler, he approached the church, said, I really, really, really want your land, but I don't want to leave you without a church. So, I'd like to build you a new one. And that new church is here to our left, the Grace United Methodist Church, built between 1886 and 1887. Now, Henry Flagler used his same architects as he did for his first business, the Hotel Ponce de Leon, and we're going to see that coming up shortly down the road. And you're going to see that they designed them both very, very similar. Now, the Grace United Methodist Church, this features Tiffany windows, features hand-carved doors, and features yours truly behind the drums on Sunday morning. Now, this church cost Henry Flagler $84,000 to build, all for a plot of land that was worth only $4,000. But they actually both made out pretty good in the deal. Now, once Henry Flagler built that church, word started to spread around town that Henry Flagler was building churches. So the Baptists approached him and they were like, will you build us a church too? And he said, no. But he thought about it a little bit and he said, all right, I'll make you a deal. If you can raise $10,000 and have it built in 2 years, I'll give you the land that it sits on. So here to our right, this yellow brick building, the ancient City Baptist Church, completed in 1895. Now, a unique feature about that church, that bell tower has no bells. That's because Henry Flagler didn't want any bells being sounded over his bells, which is coming up next to our right, the Memorial Presbyterian Church, and our stop number 8. Now, the Memorial Presbyterian Church originally was on the other side of town in a much smaller church, but Henry Flagler, his daughter Jenny Louise, had given birth to his granddaughter Marjorie, and unfortunately Marjorie only lived for a few hours, and then his daughter Jenny Louise, she succumbed to the complications from childbirth just a few days later. So he wanted somewhere very, very special to hold their memorial. So he put together the plans for this church, and then he met with the workers. He said, I need to have this completed before the 1-year anniversary of their passing. If you complete it before a year's time, I will pay you handsomely, a king's ransom. If it takes you longer than a year, I pay you nothing. So 361 days later, those workers got their king's ransom. And here we have the Memorial Presbyterian Church and our stop number 8. If you're exiting here at stop 8, please remain seated until I come to a complete stop and you hear the bell. Once you hear the bell, you can safely exit to your right towards the sidewalk, turning around to go down backwards like you're climbing down a ladder. Holding on to the handles and the uprights. Alright, thank you folks. Watch your step. So this church here was completed in 1890. So not only was it a memorial for his daughter and granddaughter, but it was also a gift to the church. They were able to move from their previous location into this one here. Seats about 600. Now, just for comparison purposes, so it cost Henry Flagler $84,000 for the Grace United Methodist Church in 1886. This one here cost him $250,000 in 1890. So we did the conversion not too long ago, and it's a little over $8 million in today's money. So those workers, they got paid. They got paid well. Now, also here inside of the church, right about where we're sitting, but on the other side, is the mausoleum.